The auction block stood empty in the dusty town square of Republic, Texas, and Quinn Thornton watched from beneath the overhang of the general store as the last of the mail-order brides were claimed by eager ranchers and miners who had scraped together their hard-earned money for a chance at companionship in this harsh land of 1873. He had not come here with the intention of bidding on anyone, just curiosity and the gnawing loneliness that had eaten at him for years since he had started working his small ranch outside of town. The sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden platform where a portly auctioneer wiped sweat from his brow and shuffled through his papers, clearly ready to call the whole affair finished when suddenly he paused and looked toward the covered wagon at the edge of the square. "Well now, seems we got one more," the auctioneer announced without much enthusiasm. "Come on out, miss." The woman who emerged from the wagon moved slowly, her steps uncertain as she climbed onto the platform. Quinn straightened from where he leaned against the post, his attention caught by something in the way she held herself, proud despite the obvious fear in her eyes. She was not the prettiest woman he had ever seen, though she was far from ugly. What struck him was the resignation in her face, as if she already knew what was coming. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her dress, though clean, had seen better days. She looked to be in her early 20s, with strong hands that spoke of hard work and a figure that was neither willowy nor stout but somewhere practically in between. "This here is Zelda Owens," the auctioneer said, his voice flat. "She comes from Pennsylvania, can read and write, and she is 23 years of age. Let us start the bidding at $50. Silence fell over the square. The men who had already claimed their brides were leading them away, and those who remained seemed uninterested. Quinn watched as Zelda's face reddened, but she kept her chin up, staring straight ahead at something in the distance as if she could will herself away from this humiliation. "Come now, gentlemen," the auctioneer tried again. $50 for a healthy woman of childbearing age who can read. That is worth something. Still nothing. Quinn felt something twist in his chest as he watched her standing there, unwanted and alone in front of the whole town. He knew that feeling too well, had carried it with him since his parents died of fever when he was 16, and left him to work their land alone. 10 years had passed since then. 10 years of back-breaking work and silent evenings with no one to talk to but his horse and the occasional ranch hand he could afford to hire for a season. $40 then, the auctioneer said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Surely someone wants a wife for $40. Quinn's feet were moving before he fully made the decision, carrying him through the thinning crowd toward the platform. His hand went to the roll of bills in his pocket, money he had saved for a new plow and seed for next season's planting. $30, he called out, his voice rough from disuse. The auctioneer's face brightened. Zelda's eyes snapped to him, wide and startled. Up close, Quinn could see they were a warm brown color, like honey in sunlight, and there was intelligence there beneath the fear and shame. $30, we have $30 from Mr. Thornton, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 40? The silence stretched out. Quinn kept his eyes on Zelda, and she stared back at him with an expression he could not quite read. Sold then, to Quinn Thornton for $30. The auctioneer banged his gavel against the podium. Come collect your bride, sir. Quinn climbed the steps to the platform, acutely aware of the few remaining townspeople watching. He pulled the money from his pocket and counted it into the auctioneer's waiting palm, then turned to Zelda. She had not moved, still standing rigid as if bracing for a blow. "Madam," he said quietly, offering his hand to help her down from the platform. "I am Quinn. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It is not much, but it is clean and the roof does not leak." Her hand was cool when she placed it in his, and he noticed she was trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for bidding." They walked together to where his wagon waited, loaded with supplies he had purchased earlier in the day. He helped her up onto the bench seat, noticing how thin she was beneath the layers of her dress. When had she last eaten a proper meal? He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue at the horses to get them moving. The ride out of town was quiet. Quinn could feel the tension radiating from Zelda beside him, and he struggled to find words that might ease her obvious distress. He was not a man comfortable with conversation, had spent too many years alone to remember how to make small talk. "I want you to know," he finally said as they left the last buildings of Republic behind, "that I will not force myself on you. You will have your own room, and when you are ready, if you are ever ready, well, that will be up to you." She turned to look at him fully for the first time, surprise clear on her face. "I do not understand. Why did you buy me if not for—" "I was lonely," Quinn said simply. "I thought perhaps you were too, seemed like we might be able to help each other out. The ranch is a lot of work for one person, and the house is too quiet, but I am not a man who would take what is not freely given." Tears suddenly welled in Zelda's eyes, and she looked away quickly, but not before he saw them spill over onto her cheeks. "I apologize," she said, her voice thick. "It is just that I expected something very different." "What happened?" Quinn asked gently. "Why did nobody bid?" She was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Then, in a voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels, she said, "I was honest in my letters. I told them I could not have children. The doctor told me after I had a bad fever 3 years ago. The other women, they whispered about it during the journey here. By the time we arrived, everyone knew. Who wants a wife who cannot give them sons to work the land?" Understanding flooded through Quinn. In a place like this, where children meant more hands to help with the endless work of survival, a barren woman was considered worthless. The injustice of it made his jaw tighten, as if she had no value beyond her ability to breed. "I am sorry that happened to you," he said, "but I want you to know that I do not care about that. I am 26 years old and I have been alone for 10 years. I would rather have someone to talk to at dinner than a house full of children I have no time to care for properly anyway." She looked at him again, searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because some of the tension left her shoulders, and she nodded slowly. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. It was modest, as Quinn had said, with a small house built from weathered wood, a barn that had seen better days, and a handful of outbuildings scattered around a yard that showed signs of constant use. A fence enclosed a pasture where several cattle grazed alongside 2 horses that looked up curiously at the approaching wagon. "It is not much to look at," Quinn admitted as he guided the horses into the yard. "But the land is good, and the creek that runs through the back never dries up, even in the hottest months." "It looks wonderful," Zelda said, and he was surprised to hear genuine warmth in her voice. "It looks like a home." He helped her down from the wagon and led her inside. The house was small, just a main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area, and 2 bedrooms off to either side. Everything was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. He watched as she looked around, taking in the simple furniture, the cold stove, the dishes stacked neatly on a shelf. "I have been cooking for myself," Quinn said, suddenly self-conscious about the plainness of everything. "I am not very good at making things nice. May I?" Zelda gestured to the kitchen area. "Of course. This is your home now, too." She moved through the space with an assessing eye, opening the cupboards to see what supplies he had, checking the stove, running her fingers along the rough-hewn table. "When did you last have a proper meal?" she asked. "I eat every day," Quinn protested. "That is not what I asked." She turned to face him, and for the first time since he had seen her on that auction block, there was something other than fear or shame in her expression. There was purpose. "Let me cook something. It will give me something to do with my hands, and we both look like we could use a good dinner." Quinn brought in her small trunk from the wagon and showed her to the bedroom that would be hers. It was smaller than his own but had a good bed with a thick mattress, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the pasture. While she freshened up, he brought in the supplies from town and then went to tend to the horses and check on the cattle. By the time he returned to the house, the smell of cooking food filled the air. Zelda had found his stores of flour and salt pork, some dried beans he had been meaning to cook for days, and the eggs his chickens had laid that morning. She had tied an apron around her waist, and her sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked with old scars. Work scars, he recognized, the kind that came from years of hard labor. "Sit," she told him, and he obeyed, taking a seat at the table he usually ate at standing up, too tired to bother with chairs. She poured him water from the pitcher and then returned to the stove. They ate together as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The food was simple but delicious, better than anything Quinn had cooked for himself in years. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle he was trying to build into a proper herd, about the challenges of working the land alone. She listened attentively, asking questions that showed she understood more about ranching than he might have expected. In turn, she told him about her life in Pennsylvania, about growing up in a factory town where she had worked in the textile mill from the age of 12. Her parents had died in an accident at the mill when she was 18, and she had been alone since then, working herself to exhaustion for wages that barely kept her fed. When she had seen the advertisement for mail-order brides, it had seemed like a chance at a different life, even if it meant traveling halfway across the country to marry a stranger. "I never imagined it would be like that auction," she said quietly, staring down at her plate. "Like cattle being sold." "I am sorry you had to go through that," Quinn said. "Nobody should be treated that way. But you bit on me anyway, even knowing I cannot give you children. Zelda, I need to be honest with you. I am not looking for a broodmare. I am looking for a partner. Someone who can help me build this place into something worth having. Someone to talk to when the days get hard. If that is something you think you might want too, then maybe this can work out for both of us." She met his eyes across the table, and he saw the shimmer of unshed tears again. "I think I would like that very much." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Quinn with its ease. Zelda proved herself to be a tireless worker, rising before dawn to cook breakfast and tend to the chickens, spending her days cleaning and organizing the house, mending his clothes and preparing meals that made him realize just how poorly he had been eating. But she was not content to stay only in the house. After a few days, she began following him outside, asking questions about the cattle and the horses, learning to milk the cow and feed the animals. "Back in Pennsylvania, I never saw a farm or a ranch," she explained as she watched him repair a section of fence. "Everything was factories and row houses. I want to learn how to do this." So he taught her. He showed her how to check the cattle for signs of illness, how to mend fence, how to judge which pastures had the best grass. She absorbed it all with an intensity that impressed him, her questions intelligent and her observations often astute. She was strong too, stronger than her slight frame suggested, capable of carrying water and feed without complaint. At night, They would sit together at the table after dinner, and slowly, conversation became easier. Quinn found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about the loneliness of the past 10 years, about the dreams he had for the ranch, about the family he barely remembered anymore. Zelda shared her own stories, about the harshness of factory life, about the friends she had lost to accidents and illness, about the desperate hope that had driven her west. "I thought if I could just get away from those factories, away from that gray, smoky sky, I might have a chance at a real life," she said one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. "But when nobody bid at that auction, I thought maybe I was foolish to hope for anything." Quinn looked at her in the fading light, at the way the sunset painted her face in warm colors, and felt something shift in his chest. She had become beautiful to him, not in spite of her ordinariness, but because of who she was beneath the surface. "I am glad nobody else bid," he said. "I do not think I would have had the courage if the bidding had been high." She turned to him with a small smile. "I am glad, too." It was several weeks before Quinn realized he had fallen in love with her. It crept up on him gradually, in small moments. The way she hummed while cooking, the fierce concentration on her face when she was learning something new, the sound of her laughter when one of the chickens did something particularly foolish, the comfortable silence they could share while working side by side. He was fairly certain she did not feel the same way about him. She was warm and friendly, a good companion, but there was still a carefulness in the way she moved around him, a distance she maintained. He respected that distance, even as he longed to close it. He had made her a promise that first day, and he intended to keep it. She would come to him when and if she was ready, and not before. One evening in late October, as the weather began to turn cool and the first hints of winter appeared on the northern wind, Zelda went into town alone to purchase some supplies they needed. Quinn had offered to go with her, but she had insisted she could manage, and he had cattle to check on the far side of the property. He thought nothing of it until she returned hours later than expected, her face pale and her hands shaking as she climbed down from the wagon. "What happened?" Quinn demanded, rushing to her side. "Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine," she said, but her voice was unsteady. "There were some men in town, drunk and causing trouble. They recognized me from the auction. They said things." Rage flooded through Quinn, hot and immediate. "What men? What did they say?" "It does not matter. I left before anything happened. But Quinn, they followed me for a while. I had to take the long way back to make sure they did not see where I turned off." He pulled her into his arms without thinking, holding her close as she trembled against him. "You should have let me come with you. I should have been there." "You cannot be with me every moment," she said into his chest, "and I will not be afraid to go to town." But she was afraid. He could feel it in the way she clung to him. After a moment she pulled back, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for caring." "Of course I care," Quinn said, his hands still on her shoulders. "Zelda, you must know by now that you mean a great deal to me." Something flickered in her expression, surprise and something else, something that might have been hope. Before either of them could say anything more, the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. 3 riders were coming up the road toward the house, and Quinn recognized them as some of the rougher cowboys who worked at the big ranch on the other side of Republic. "Get inside," Quinn told Zelda quietly. "Lock the door and stay away from the windows." "No, this is my fault." "I will not hide while you face them alone." "Zelda, please." But she stayed beside him as the 3 men rode into the yard. They were young, probably not much older than Zelda, with the hard eyes and cruel mouths of men who had learned to take what they wanted. The one in the lead grinned when he saw them standing together. "Well now, looks like we found the right place after all," he said, his words slightly slurred. We just wanted to come by and congratulate old Quinn here on getting himself such a bargain. $30. That is cheaper than a good saddle. Get off my property, Quinn said, his voice deadly calm. You are not welcome here. Aw, do not be like that. We were just being friendly. Maybe the lady would like some company. After all, if one man only paid $30 for her, maybe she is available for less. The other two laughed, and Quinn felt Zelda stiffen beside him. He stepped forward, putting himself between her and the mounted men. I am going to ask you one more time to leave. After that, I will make you leave. The leader's grin faded. You threatening us, Thornton. There are 3 of us and 1 of you. There are 2 of us, Zelda said clearly, and Quinn glanced back to see she had picked up the pitchfork he had left leaning against the porch rail. And this is our land. You are trespassing. For a moment the men seemed uncertain, then the leader spat into the dirt. This is not over, he said. You better watch yourself, Thornton, and your wife too. They wheeled their horses and rode off, but Quinn knew they would be back. Men like that always came back when their pride was wounded. He turned to Zelda, taking the pitchfork gently from her hands. You should have gone inside, he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only worry. I told you I will not hide. Her chin was up, her eyes blazing with a fierce light he had not seen before. I have been afraid too much of my life, Quinn. I will not be afraid anymore. That night, Quinn loaded his rifle and kept it beside the bed. He barely slept, listening for the sound of horses or footsteps outside. But the men did not return that night or the next. After a week, he began to relax his guard, though he still insisted on accompanying Zelda whenever she needed to go to town. The incident had changed something between them, though. Zelda was more open with him now, more willing to share her thoughts and feelings. She began sitting closer to him in the evenings, and sometimes he would catch her looking at him with an expression that made his heart race. He was careful not to push, not to assume anything, but he could not help the hope that grew in him. Winter came on hard that year, with storms that dumped snow across the prairie and winds that howled around the house at night. Quinn worked from dawn to dusk, keeping the cattle alive, breaking ice on the creek so they could drink, hauling hay from the barn to the feeding areas. Zelda worked beside him, bundled in layers of clothing, her face red from the cold but determined. They moved together like partners who had worked side by side for years, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other when the work became overwhelming. One particularly brutal evening, they stumbled back to the house exhausted and half frozen. Quinn built up the fire while Zelda made coffee, and they sat close to the stove, trying to warm their numb fingers and toes. The wind outside was so loud they could barely hear each other speak. I do not know how you survived 10 winters alone, Zelda said, her teeth chattering. I cannot imagine doing this by myself. I do not know how I did it either now, Quinn admitted. Having you here, it makes everything easier. Even the hard days are better because I know you are here. She looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were icy, but he laced them through his own and held on tight. Quinn, I need to tell you something. His heart was suddenly pounding. What is it? I have been thinking a lot about what you said that first day, about how I would come to you when I was ready. And I think I am ready now. I think I have been ready for a while, but I was scared. Scared that you only see me as a helper or a companion. Scared that I am not enough for you. Not enough. Quinn set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Zelda, you are everything. You are the reason I wake up in the morning happy instead of dreading another empty day. You are the reason this place feels like a home instead of just a house. I have been in love with you for months, but I did not want to push you, did not want to make you feel obligated. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. You love me. Yes, he said simply. I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you hum when you cook. I love how you are not afraid of hard work and how you ask a million questions about everything. I love you, Zelda. She threw her arms around his neck, and he pulled her close, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. I love you too, she whispered against his skin. I was not sure I could ever feel this way about anyone, but you have been so patient and kind and good to me. I love you, Quinn. He pulled back just enough to see her face, and then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, but she pressed closer and kissed him back with a passion that made his head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she laughed. What is funny? He asked, smiling despite himself. I just realized that I am so happy. I did not think I would ever be happy again after that auction, but here I am in a snowstorm in the middle of nowhere, frozen half to death, and I am happier than I have ever been. Me too, Quinn said, kissing her again. Me too. They were married the following week at the small church in Republic, with the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Zelda wore her nicest dress, and Quinn had ridden into town the day before to buy her a simple gold ring that was probably more than he should have spent. But he wanted her to have something that showed the world she was his wife in truth now, not just a woman he had bought at an auction. When he slipped it onto her finger, she cried again, but these were happy tears. The winter passed in a blur of hard work and stolen moments of happiness. Their relationship deepened into something Quinn had never imagined possible. Zelda was his partner in every sense of the word, and in the cold winter nights, they would lie together and talk about their dreams for the future, for what the ranch could become. I want to have the biggest herd in this part of Texas, Quinn said one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. I want to build a better house, a bigger barn. I want to make something that will last. We will do it together, Zelda promised. Whatever you dream, we will build it together. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it brought new life to the land. The cattle who had survived the winter were healthy, and several of the cows had calves that filled the pastures with their awkward, endearing presence. Quinn and Zelda worked from dawn to dusk, planting crops, mending fences damaged by the winter storms, and planning for the future. In May, 2 months after their wedding, Zelda came to Quinn in the barn where he was repairing a saddle. She had an odd expression on her face, something between disbelief and joy. Quinn, I need to tell you something, but I do not know how it is possible. He set down the leather he was working on and gave her his full attention. What is it? Are you all right? I think I might be pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. Quinn stared at her, trying to process what she had said. But the doctor said you could not have children. I know. But I have missed my monthly courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings and my body feels different. Quinn, I know it does not make sense, but I think there is a baby. He pulled her into his arms, his mind reeling. If she was right, if there really was a baby, it would be a miracle. But even if she was wrong, even if it was just her body playing tricks or some other explanation, it did not matter. He loved her regardless. We will go see the doctor in town, Quinn said. We will find out for certain. But Zelda, whether there is a baby or not, you know that does not change anything between us, right? I know, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. But oh, Quinn, what if it is true? What if we really are going to have a child? The doctor in Republic was an elderly man who had practiced medicine for 40 years and had seen just about everything. He examined Zelda carefully, asked her questions, and then sat back with a thoughtful expression. Well, Mrs. Thornton, I cannot explain it, but you are definitely pregnant. About 2 months along, if I had to guess. Sometimes these things happen. Maybe the previous doctor was wrong, or maybe your body healed from whatever damage the fever caused. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Zelda started crying right there in the doctor's office, and Quinn held her while she shook with sobs of relief and joy. They rode home in a daze, both of them struggling to believe what they had been told. "We are going to have a baby," Zelda kept saying, as if repetition would make it more real. "Quinn, we are going to be parents." "I know," he said, grinning so wide his face hurt. "I know." That night, as they lay in bed, Quinn rested his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a family. I never thought I would have one." "You already had me," Zelda said. "We were already a family, I know, but this is even more than I dreamed of." The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick often in the early months, and Quinn worried constantly about her working too hard. She refused to slow down, though, insisting that she was perfectly capable of doing her share of the ranch work. They compromised, with Quinn taking on the heavier tasks and Zelda focusing on the house and the chickens and cooking. As her belly grew, Quinn found himself overcome with love every time he looked at her. She was creating life, carrying their child, and the miracle of it never stopped amazing him. He would catch himself staring at her while she worked, marveling that this incredible woman had come into his life, that she loved him, that they were building a family together. In late summer, they received unexpected news. The big ranch on the other side of Republic, the one that employed the cowboys who had harassed Zelda, was selling off some of its land. The owner had died, and his widow wanted to move back east to be near her children. Quinn had saved every penny they could spare, and with the money from selling their spring calves, they had just enough to buy an additional 200 acres that bordered their property. "It will nearly bankrupt us," Quinn admitted as they discussed it. "We will be eating beans and cornbread for the next year, and I will have to do some work for other ranchers to make ends meet. But this land, Zelda, it has water and good grass. With this land, we could really build something." "Then we should do it," Zelda said without hesitation. "We are not afraid of hard work or tight finances. Let us buy the land." They did, signing the papers in September when Zelda was 7 months pregnant and could barely squeeze behind the desk in the lawyer's office. Walking out of that office, knowing they now owned nearly 400 acres, Quinn felt a pride he had never experienced before. This was theirs, built through hard work and sacrifice. This was the legacy they would leave to their child. The baby came in November, on a cold morning when frost covered the ground and the sky was the pale blue of early winter. The labor was long and difficult, with the doctor and his wife staying at the ranch for nearly 20 hours before the baby finally arrived. Quinn paced outside the bedroom door, terrified by every cry of pain he heard from Zelda, praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. When the doctor finally opened the door and told him he could come in, Quinn rushed to Zelda's side. She looked exhausted, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale, but she was smiling as she held a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. "It is a boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Quinn looked down at the tiny face, at the miniature hands that waved in the air, and felt his eyes fill with tears. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." "What should we name him?" Zelda asked. They had discussed names before, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at this new life they had created together, Quinn thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. "What about Matthew? It means gift of God." Zelda's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Matthew Thornton. Yes, that is perfect." The years that followed were full of hard work and growth. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Quinn took on work wherever he could find it, breaking horses for other ranchers, helping with roundups, doing whatever was needed to bring in extra money. Zelda managed the house and cared for Matthew, but she also kept the books for the ranch, tracked expenses and income with a careful eye that helped them avoid the financial disasters that befell so many of their neighbors. Matthew grew into a sturdy, cheerful child who loved following his father around the ranch. By the time he was 3, he was already trying to help with the chores, dragging small buckets of feed to the chickens and learning to gentle the barn cats. Quinn loved teaching his son about the land, seeing the world anew through his eyes. When Matthew was 4, Zelda became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she barely slowed down at all, laughing when Quinn tried to coddle her. Their daughter was born in the spring, during a thunderstorm that shook the house. They named her Sarah, and she had her mother's brown eyes and a temperament that was both sweet and stubborn. With 2 children to care for and the ranch growing every year, life was busier than Quinn had ever imagined it could be. But it was good, so good that sometimes he would stop in the middle of working and just look around, amazed at how much had changed since that day he had bid $30 for a woman nobody else wanted. One evening, when Matthew was 8 and Sarah was 4, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. The ranch now had a proper herd of over 100 cattle, a new barn, and a house that Quinn had expanded to include 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They had hired 2 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse Quinn had built, and there was talk in town of the Thornton Ranch becoming one of the most successful in the area. Matthew was telling a long, rambling story about something that had happened with the new calf that morning, and Sarah was sitting on Quinn's lap, playing with the buttons on his shirt. Zelda sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee, and Quinn felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking about?" Zelda asked, noticing his expression. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Quinn said. "How that day in Republic when I saw you on that auction block was the best day of my life. I was so lonely before you came, Zelda. I did not even realize how lonely until you were here, and I was not lonely anymore." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was lonely too. I thought my life was over when nobody would bid on me. I thought I would end up in some terrible situation, used and thrown away. But you saw me as a person, as someone worth more than my ability to have children. You gave me a chance at a real life." "You gave me more than a chance," Quinn said. "You gave me everything. A wife I love, children I adore, a home that feels full of life and laughter. You gave me the family I always wanted." Matthew, oblivious to the emotional conversation happening above his head, had moved on to planning what he wanted to do tomorrow. Sarah had fallen asleep against Quinn's chest, her thumb in her mouth. The sun was nearly gone now, just a sliver of gold on the horizon, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "I love you," Zelda said quietly. "I will love you for the rest of my life, Quinn Thornton." "I love you too," Quinn replied, kissing the top of her head. "For the rest of my life and beyond." The years continued to pass in the way they do when life is full and good. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Quinn and Zelda's love deepened with each passing season. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts and hard winters, times when money was tight and worry kept them up at night. There were illnesses and injuries, the everyday dangers of ranch life. But they faced everything together, as partners, and nothing ever shook the foundation they had built. Matthew grew into a tall, strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah was bright and curious, always reading when she was not helping her mother or learning to ride from her father. When Matthew was 16, Zelda surprised them all by becoming pregnant again. At 41 years old, she had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but their third child, a son they named James, arrived healthy and loud in the spring of 1890. By then, the Thornton Ranch was one of the most respected in the area. They had over 300 head of cattle, prime pastureland, and a reputation for fair dealing that brought buyers from as far away as San Antonio. Quinn had built a legacy, but more importantly, he had built a family. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinn and Zelda stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set just as they had so many times before. Matthew was off checking the cattle in the north pasture. Sarah was inside putting James to bed, and for a moment, they were alone together. "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked suddenly. "Bidding on me that day, your life would have been simpler without me." Quinn turned to her, surprised by the question. She was 43 now, with silver threads in her brown hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting against the sun, but she was more beautiful to him than she had been at 23. "Simpler, maybe," he said, "but emptier, lonelier, meaningless." "Zelda, you are the best decision I ever made. You and our children, this life we built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted." She smiled, that same smile that had made his heart race when he first saw it all those years ago. "I feel the same way. I think about that girl standing on that auction block, so afraid and ashamed, and I want to tell her that everything will be all right, better than all right. I want to tell her that she will find love and happiness and a home, that she will have a family." "You gave me the family I always wanted," Quinn said, pulling her close, "and I hope I gave you the life you deserved." "You did," Zelda whispered against his chest. "You gave me everything." They stood there together as the sun disappeared and the stars came out, as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times again. Inside, they could hear Sarah singing to James, some lullaby that Zelda had sung to her when she was small. Somewhere in the distance, Matthew was whistling as he rode back toward the house, his work done for the day. It had been 17 years since Quinn Thornton had stood in the dusty town square of Republic, Texas, and made a decision that changed his life. 17 years since he had bid $30 on a bride nobody else wanted. Those years had brought joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship, but through it all, they had been together. They had built something that would last, not just the ranch and the land, but the love that bound them together and the family they had created. As they turned to go inside, Quinn took one last look at the land spread out before them, at the home they had built, at the life they had made. It was good. It was more than good. It was everything. And it had all started with a lonely cowboy and a woman nobody would bid on who had found in each other exactly what they both needed: a partner, a love, a family, a home. The night was peaceful as they went inside together, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. Their story was not one of grand adventure or dramatic rescue, but of two lonely people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of quiet, enduring love. It was a story that would be told in the Thornton family for generations, of how their great-grandparents had met at an auction, how love had grown from the humblest of beginnings, and how a family had been built on a foundation of respect, hard work, and devotion. Matthew would tell it to his children, and Sarah to hers and James to his, and with each telling the legacy would grow. But that night, as Quinn and Zelda climbed into bed, tired from another long day of work, they were not thinking about legacies or stories. They were thinking about each other, about the children sleeping in the rooms down the hall, about the ranch that would need tending in the morning. They were thinking about the present moment, this life they shared, and how grateful they were for it. Quinn pulled Zelda close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting against him in the way that had become second nature over the years. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and one of the horses whinnied in response. The familiar sounds of the ranch at night, sounds that meant home. "Good night, my love," Zelda murmured, already half asleep. "Good night," Quinn replied, kissing her forehead. "I love you. I love you too." And in the peaceful darkness of their bedroom, surrounded by the life they had built together, Quinn Thornton closed his eyes and gave thanks once again for the day he had been brave enough to bid on a bride nobody else wanted. She had given him everything he had ever dreamed of and more. She had given him a partner, a love, and the family he had always wanted. It was a good life, a blessed life. And it was theirs, built together through years of hard work and love, and it would endure long after they were gone, in the children and grandchildren who would carry their story forward. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to simply be together, to know that they were loved and that they had loved well. The ranch would be there in the morning with all its demands and challenges. But tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent and a life well lived. Tomorrow they would rise with the sun and begin again, as they had every day for 17 years, working side by side to build and maintain the life they had created. But that was tomorrow. Tonight they were simply Quinn and Zelda, two people who had found each other when they needed each other most, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of loneliness and despair. Tonight they were home, they were together, and they were loved. And that was everything. The end.